everyone, it's Cass. Welcome back to my channel, What Cass Read. Today we're going to do a video that I've been saving for right around this time, and that is my favorite fantasy books. This past weekend on November 18th was actually my 1-year anniversary here on Booktube. My channel primarily talks about fantasy books, so I thought that I would like to celebrate my 1-year anniversary on Booktube by talking about my favorite fantasy books for you. So let's start with this one. This is The Hobbit, written by J.R.R. Tolkien. This is the book that got me into the genre hands down. I had always read those like children's books that were more fantastical adventures, so I read the Animorphs books, I read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe 100 times, I've read the Chronicles of Narnia several times, but it was really The Hobbit that launched my reading journey into adult fantasy. And then I have my copy of The Fellowship of the Ring. These are my two favorites, I guess, in the Lord of the Rings universe. I just love The Hobbit so much because for me, I started with this one and I got so attached to the dwarves. I got so attached to Bilbo. I just felt like it was just one big family adventure and there were new things around the corner. The pacing of this book never felt off to me. It was just this perfect little nugget of adventure, just the right introduction to the larger conflict ahead, but itself, as its own standalone book, was just something that I had always treasured. I like this book because we get introduced to so many new things. Like, I think I already have Middle-earth figured out, but we're moving through Rivendell, we're moving through Moria, we meet Tom Bombadil, which the fact that they cut Tom Bombadil out of the films was probably the biggest heartbreak of my life. I'm not gonna lie, when I started The Lord of the Rings, I missed The Hobbit so much. Like, I missed all the dwarves, and I wasn't really attached to Frodo for a long time because I was like, you're not Bilbo. This book, This Is the Name of the Wind, written by Patrick Rothfuss. None of these books are in any particular order, but this book was the best book that I read of the entire year last year, and I read this in December. There's two very strong camps of either you hate this book or you love this book, you don't understand this book, you just can't get enough of this book and all the fan theories, but I feel like this book was a pivotal book for the genre, and it just flipped everything upside its head because of how it framed the story. And for me, when I first read this book, I knew this was going to be a 5-star read. Like, within the first couple of pages, just because of the way that the story was being set up, the way it was framed. It's one of the first times as readers we're really introduced to that unreliable narrator. Are the things that he's telling us, are they true or not? So if it didn't turn the entire fantasy genre on its head, it certainly turned my reading of fantasy on its head, and I absolutely love this book. So This Is the Name of the Wind, written by Patrick Rothfuss. This is a book that I read before Booktube. This is Game of Thrones, written by J.R.R. Martin. I feel like everybody knows this one as well because of the HBO adaptation, and I feel like even if you don't read books, you're very familiar with this story. I picked the first book in this series because once we get to Feast for Crows, which is book 4, that book and I didn't get along very well, and it took me a very long time to get through Dance with Dragons. But I finished all 5 books that are out currently. This book is still my favorite one because we have Eddard Stark's perspectives in this book, and we don't get his perspective for the rest of the series. I remember I was working with some of my friends, and it was this woman and I who became pretty fast friends that we talked a lot about books. She's the one who actually introduced me to one of my favorite books of all time, which is The Pillars of the Earth. Then she also said, have you read Game of Thrones yet? I was like, oh, I think I've seen it here and there. It was probably like right when HBO released, I think, like the DVD or Blu-ray set, because as soon as I finished reading this, I grabbed my husband and I was like, we have to watch this TV series. Like, this book blew me out of the water. It was so gritty. The characters that we get introduced to are unlike anything that I had seen before as well. The amount of characters that we follow in this one is still pretty manageable, and then as you get on into the series, there's more characters that you're introduced to, but there's so much buy-in, there's so many things that you root for, there's so many characters in here that you can root for. I don't talk about this book enough on my channel, but that's because I feel like there's plenty of Game of Thrones content out there, but just know that this book is absolutely one of my favorites. So of course I have to talk about this series. This is the Live Ship Traders trilogy from Rob and Hobb. These are books 2 and 3. This is The Mad Ship and Ship of Destiny. And the Live Ship Traders trilogy catapulted itself to my top trilogy of all time. And these 2 books, I just couldn't decide between the 2 of them, like which one I should pick out of the whole trilogy as to why I love it. I have full spoiler and spoiler-free reviews of these books already on my channel, but these 2 books take on so many social issues. It takes on slavery, it takes on violence toward women, it takes on family dynamics unlike really anything I've ever seen, it takes on abuse and trauma. I really couldn't pick between my love for these two books in the series. They were both 5-star reads for me. So this is Mad Ship and Ship of Destiny, written by Robin Hobb. Just know that I have a whole Robin Hobb video planned for everyone, and that's not the only Robin Hobb books on this list. So this is also Fool's Errand, written by Robin Hobb. This is book 1 of the Tawny Man trilogy. This one is one of my favorite fantasy books of all time because we are introduced to the realm of the Elderlings through the Farseer trilogy, and this book felt like a love letter to fans of that trilogy, and it felt like a love letter to the characters. It wrapped up that first trilogy in a way that I didn't feel like I got from the ending of Farseer, even though that ending was really incredible. It's so hard for me to pick and choose between these. Robin Hobb is my favorite fantasy author, and as someone, if you are a lover of fantasy, you've got to pick her up. This is another fantasy author that I know I've talked about a lot on this channel already as well. I actually do have a whole video on how to read Michael J. Sullivan. This is Theft of Swords. This is book number 1 of the Rhaeria Revelations trilogy, and this is a book trilogy that I read long before I joined Booktube, and this book, the reason why it's among my favorites is because it cemented in my mind that yes, you are a fantasy reader. Just own it, just live up to it, and stop reading books that you're not really interested in. I was flipping through some of the things that my friends had read and people that I knew that I trusted their opinions on books before. And so that's how I ended up picking this one up, and it was just like a huge success for me. It moves so fast-paced, but it's just really funny and lighthearted. Out of all the books that I had been reading, I guess fantasy-wise, if you look at The Lord of the Rings and you look at Game of Thrones, this had really been the first time for me where humor was introduced into the genre, and I just couldn't get enough of it. Like, I could not get enough of Royce and Hadrian, the two main characters. I know a lot of people on Booktube have read this, but I'm just saying, like, keep up with the series even if you don't like this first one, because the action, everything gets tied together. Like as a trilogy of books, Michael J. Sullivan mapped the whole thing out, so when things get tied together you can really see the connections where they started from. And then, as long as I'm mentioning multiple books by authors that I love, this is The Rose and the Thorn, also by Michael J. Sullivan. This is in the Rhaeria Chronicles. This is book number 2, and it's a set of prequel novels. This one deserves its place in my favorites because this one we finally get some really great backstory on Royce and Hadrian, and it's a little bit dark, and I really enjoyed it. So while I talked about the Rhaeria Revelations having humor in it, this one got a little bit dark, and you know, I was okay with that. So this is The Lies of Locke Lamora, written by Scott Lynch. I do have a full spoiler-free and spoiler review of this on my channel. This was another book where I legitimately laughed out loud, and there were so many moments in this book that made me audibly react to it, and I feel like when an author can make you audibly react to the story, then you've got something really great on your hands. This is the story about Locke Lamora, who is a part of the Gentlemen Bastards. They're this group of thieves. I guess I have a thing for thieves in my fantasy series, but they're so incredibly smart about what they do, and the writing in here is so smart as well. It's a little bit dense. It took me, you know, a good chunk to actually feel really invested and feel like I understood everything that was going on, but once I did, this whole world of Camor opened up to me. There's a really great reading experience for me when I feel like I just finally understood and I could visualize what was going on because I could just see the whole world. I don't think there's a lot of authors that can do that to me quite like Scott Lynch did. I've been thinking about picking up Red Seas Under Red Skies pretty soon because I've just been really, as I was formulating this list, I've been really thinking about this one a lot lately. 2 books written by Naomi Novik. I have Uprooted and Spinning Silver. Again, reviewed both of these books and I loved them. It breaks my heart that most people don't consider these among their favorites, and I guess to each their own. Everybody gets their own opinion. But these are standalone fairy tale retellings, and I'm not a fairy tale retelling kind of person, but the way that Naomi Novik presents these fairy tales, like it's just enough of the story to give you a good root in the plot, but then it vastly goes off from there. Spinning Silver is a loose reinterpretation of Rumpelstiltskin, and then Uprooted, again, is a very loose interpretation of The Beauty and the Beast. It really saddens me when people are not as into these as they should be, but these were both 5-star reads for me, so I had to include them in my favorite fantasy list. So this one right here, this is The Bear and the Nightingale, written by Katherine Arden. This book I finished literally 2 days ago, and I tweeted out when I was reading it that I feel like everybody told me this was a good book, but I also feel like you way undersold this book. This book is another one that it takes a loose interpretation of some folk tales, and this takes place in the Russian wilderness. And I loved this for how beautiful this setting and the magic interwove together. It had forest spirits and religion and the Russian woods, and you think they're not going to go together, but they do. But I think especially like reading it in the wintertime with forest spirits and the Russian woods just spoke to me on so many levels. It was unbelievable. I read this book in 2 days. I haven't read a book like that fast in so long, where I got to like page 150. I was like, oh, I should really go to bed. This has to get mentioned in a favorite fantasy video as well. I just don't think there's going to be many books that are going to be able to top this kind of atmosphere that was created in The Bear and the Nightingale. And the last 2 books that I want to mention are 2 middle grade fantasy novels that completely took me by surprise. This is Nevermoor-The Trials of Morrigan Crow, and then this is its sequel, Wundersmith-The Calling of Morrigan Crow. I have compared this to Harry Potter in the past, but I think the reason why I compare it to Harry Potter, not because of like this child getting whisked away into this magical world and then we're discovering new magic along with them. There's plenty of stories that do that, but this is a story that talks about family and wanting to belong to something and creating family units around yourself, but also learning about a new world and a new culture without having anyone to guide you, and the feelings and the loneliness, but also the excitement that that can bring. And I think that really resonates with a lot of people. Both of these books were 5 out of 5 stars. And even though they're recent favorites, I'm going to be thinking about this series and talking about this series to as many people as I can. It was resetting my expectations of what fantasy could be. So there's my gigantic stack of books. I think as I have developed as a fantasy reader, there's always going to be the classics that I'm attracted to, which is why The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Game of Thrones is always going to be in this stack of books for favorites for me. But as I've discovered more series, I've learned about crafting humor in this genre. I've learned about what it means to have a fully fleshed out female character and having someone who understands what female fantasy characters could go through and written so well. And then just having these newer fantasy things come out that it's like fantasy can be something different than something really traditional. And that's why you have Uprooted and The Bear and the Nightingale, and you even have something like Nevermoor that have made this list. I feel like I'm always going to add new books to this list, and as I continue on in my booktube journey and start discovering more and more fantasy books, I hope that you'll continue to join me, and you'll stick around for another year and another one after that. Does that sound a little too cliche? Please put some comments in the comment section below of some of your favorite fantasy books. If there's something on your list that I haven't gotten to, let me know and I'll try and add it to my TBR. Otherwise, you can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram. It's at @WhatCassRead. It's the same as this channel. Super easy to find. And of course, my Goodreads link is always going to be down below. Other than that, I'll talk to you later. Bye.